Hello, everybody. Good morning and good evening, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. My name is Krishna, and I'm very excited to be here with you to speak to you about, estimations and agility and how we should move forward with, agile estimations, how estimations are done, why they're done, what's the right way to do it, and the different approaches, the mindset that needs to change, right? So as we get started, I know you all join us from different parts of either India or the rest of the world. So good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. And just to because we're going to be talking with each other over the next hour or so, I thought it'll be reasonable for me to give a little bit about my background, so that we no longer remain strangers. So my name is Krishna Joshi. I work as I'm a passionate agile coach, and an avid agile practitioner. I've done I've had several opportunities to work with companies across the different parts of the world. Uh, I've worked with top MNCs, top Fortune 100 companies in their agile transformation journey. I've had the opportunity to be on the advisory board for agile transformations, scaled agile transformations, what have you. Fortunately, given that the world of agile is so buzzing, I've also had the opportunity to be a presenter at a few agile conferences as well. So that's something that I take immense pride in. I've done, quite a few agile certifications to stay current and to also, learn from the different participants that come to these trainings, understand their experiences, their use cases, their industries, and their backgrounds. So that's that. I've been doing this for over a decade and a half now. My core strengths lie in the area of project program portfolio management, and I'm also a director of engineering as well, right? I had the opportunity to manage super large projects, which span multi-year, multi-million-dollar. And agile coaching and facilitation is something that I do, out of passion, quite a lot, right? So while that's about me, we zoom further in and talk about estimations, and estimations in agile. So at the outset, the estimations, in the conventional world, or the conventional methods used to be done using something called the work breakdown structure, which was a very laborious process of trying to estimate everything that we could possibly undertake over the next 6 months or the next 1 year's horizon, which was the life of the project, right? There's a paradigm shift in how estimations are done in the world of Agile. So we'll go through some of that. So in understanding in the estimations, we will go over the concepts of relative sizing. You must have heard that the estimates in Agile are given in story points. Let's try to understand why that is the case. What are story points? Why do we not give estimates in in hours, or days that like we conventionally used to? The gamification of the estimation process itself, both to make it fun and easy, is done using a game called Planning Poker. So we will go over that. We'll also talk about affinity estimation. I also have somewhere in there, right after the planning poker, I have an exercise planted in there to showcase how we can basically try and simulate and do estimation as a as a mini exercise as well. And using those estimates, how can we identify the schedule? How do we basically try and identify the length of the sprint, the cost of the sprint, etc. So we will go over that in a little bit of detail. And towards the end we will obviously have a reasonable amount of time for questions and answers. That is something that I really look forward to, because that's my learning channel. So I'd strongly encourage you to post your questions when we open up the Q&A hour. All right, that said, so let's start with the first activity, if you will. Right, so what you see on the screen is obviously an aerial view of one of the metro cities. The name of the city is not very relevant. However, what we want to do, what I would like to encourage you to do, is to take a look at this picture and give me an estimate of the tallest building that you see. First of all, try to spot the tallest building, which to me looks like this one out here, which has got this blue and white design on it. So that seems to be the tallest building. So if you can give me, if I were to ask you to give me the size or the height of this building in centimeters, would you be able to do that? Right, really quick. Now, that's a tough call, right? Why do we say it's a tough call? I mean, without, I think if we don't have the tools in place, and by just looking at it, because I've asked for the estimate as an absolute number and in specific units like centimeters, that makes it a little, that makes it a little tough. It's a tricky question. On the contrary, I give you a choice and say, look at the three buildings on the right, right? So this part, which is the white one, the yellow one, and then the brown one, right? So let's see if we were to do the same estimation exercise of these buildings. Let's basically try and understand a concept called relative estimation. Relative estimation, suggests that you identify the smallest unit amongst the multiple units that need to be estimated. In this case, as you can see, it could be the white building here, right here, right? And if I say, please help me estimate the building in the middle, which is the yellow one, then you might, and I say that your estimation has to be a comparison of the first unit that you identify. So let's call this one unit, which is the white building. And if I were to ask you to estimate the yellow building, what would you say? Right? 8 times out of 10, I've heard answers that say, this is almost, twice the size, or it's definitely double the size. So we go with this as a 1, and then this becomes a 2. In doing relative estimation, the first step is to identify the smallest, like I said, the smallest chunk of the different items on the table, call that a 1, and then estimate the size of the next few items that you have on the table relative to that. So if this is twice this building, then we would call this as a 1, this as a 2. Now if I ask you to estimate the size of the brown building, which is behind it, you might go ahead and say, some might say 3, it's that this is thrice the effort. Some might say this is the five times the effort, but at least we get the range. However, the point to basically notice here is that this is so much more easier to estimate if we were to do relative estimation, as opposed to doing your estimations in absolute numbers, which was a conventional way, which is to measure the height of any of these buildings in centimeters, right? Now, if we've gotten to that stage of realization, you might ask, okay, now am I going to keep playing with these units, which is 1 unit and through 2 units and 3 units and such? When am I going to get the actual size? Or when am I going to get, if somebody asks me for the sum of building A, B, and C, then how am I going to get it, and what units will I use? In such a case, what we do is that if we were to estimate, a number of buildings here, then we would estimate them all using the relative estimation technique. Following that, we would only need to try and measure the height of this one building, and then if this is x, and if your total of all of the buildings was 10x, then exactly. Then you only need to estimate x, and then how the rest of the sum total of all of the estimates is shaping up to be, right? So this is one concept. It's called relative estimation. Let's jump over. We can use another similar example. If that one was too cluttered, is to say, you know what? If we were to the same thing here again, I let you identify something in one of these, items in this whole fruit platter, right? I'm a health conscious person, so I chose this as well. I also like, I also have interests in real estate, so that's why I had the other slide. So hopefully this basically it resonates with some of you. So do me a favor, identify one of these, one of the smallest items that you see on this slide, right? If you identify one of them, then we're gonna call that a one pointer. And then, if we were to, after that, if we were to estimate the size if we were to estimate the size / weight or mass of the other fruits, it would be relative to that specific one fruit, right? I'm sure most of you, have taken a look and have possibly decided and said, okay, so the grapefruit is the one that's of the smallest size. So we'll consider that as a 1. And then what we do after that is, every time we have to compare that, every time we have to estimate another fruit, say for instance strawberry, then we would basically do a comparison between the smallest unit, which is a 1 pointer, with the strawberry, which could be a 2 pointer or a 3 pointer, depending on depending on the group and what the group's dynamics say, or how big the strawberry looks. So it could be 2 or a 3, but the difference between 2 and 3 is not too much, right? So that's where we are at. So this is one thing that I wanted to share with you in trying to explain the concept of relative estimation. So that's number 1. Let's get into the next part in trying to understand the different factors that actually play a role in estimating stories. Now let's see what they are. One of the key factors, and we've only played with fruits or real estate so far, or building heights. Now let's get to the real world of software development, right? If we were asked to develop, or if we were asked to estimate a story, for development, how would we go about it? There obviously, if there is a group of people that are trying to estimate this, the best way to go about estimating this would be to say, all right, let's break this down into what our definition of done is. And everybody should be on the same page with what the definition of done should be for a specific story, for all stories for that matter, right? And typically the definition of done, as you will agree, for a story is a checklist of things that need to be done for the story to be considered as done. For example, if we were to develop a login page, the different items that would go in there would be, in the definition of done, could be A, is the UX design done, right? Secondly, is the development done? Thirdly, is a unit testing done? Fourth, is there QA testing done? Fifth, and this could be optional, are we automating the test cases, the unit test cases that we wrote? And that's pretty much, if there's any documentation that needs to be done, then that would be the 6th one. So those are things that everybody needs to keep in mind before they come up with an estimate, right? Or before they can suggest, as to what the size of a specific story is, right? Now, that said, there are, other techniques for estimation. What are the techniques for estimation? A is that if you have no idea what this is, for instance, a while back, one of the teams that I used to work for was trying to build an e-commerce portal, and in which they were to do they were to basically do payment gateway integration with a Visa, with a Master, or with Paytm or mobile wallets like those. Now, because they did not have any idea, one option was for them to do a spike and then figure out. The other option is for them to depend on an expert who's been there and done this before. So the second option is where they go for an expert opinion, and the team seeks help from this external SME who's done that before to estimate the story. The second method is called the analogy, and this, by the way, is the most common way of estimating a user story, right? How do you estimate a story? The estimate for a story is a comparison of this story with another story, right? That's the analogy. The third one is disaggregation. Now, if we think that we can estimate the story, unlike the one that the first one, we can actually estimate the story, but it's just that this is too big to estimate. So there may be a greater degree of error if we estimate such a big story. So what do? We break this down into multiple stories. If it's a feature, into multiple stories. If it's a story, then again into multiple smaller stories, so that they can be easily estimated. So those are three very common techniques and situations when we would use these techniques, right? Now, there are factors that influence estimation. I'm sure these are common regardless of what methods we follow. There's complexity, there's uncertainty, and the effort. Complexity, gives the level of complexity, which is the story or the feature is this either functional complexity or functional uncertainty, or technical complexity, technical uncertainty. Similar is the case with effort as well, right? How much effort is needed for us to achieve the definition of time, right? So those are three common factors that influence the estimation, right? Now, what I spoke about the game or a technique that's used, and if you noticed, I've only used numbers in the Fibonacci series, whether it was for the first example, which is the real estate view, where we were trying to estimate the relative size of different buildings, or if it was for the fruits in the next slide. Now, why did we do that? We stick to a Fibonacci series to pick numbers because of the following reasons. A, if you chose numbers which are in sequence, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, then if we ask somebody to estimate, it's very likely that they will be tempted to choose, and they'll obviously have an impression on the mind that the need is for precision and accuracy, so they will have to stick to a number. As opposed to that, if the choice is made to choose a series like Fibonacci series, then they can only choose numbers like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, etc. Where the sum of each number, each number is the sum of the previous two numbers, right? What that means is that if you identify something which is not a 5, but it's slightly greater than 5, but it's less than 8, then you have no choice but to give an 8. So that's where the estimation ends. Now, the good part about this is that nobody needs to get down into details and pinpoint and say that this is a 6.5 pointer. or a 6-pointer or a 7-pointer. Nobody needs to get to do that. Why? Because A, we don't want to spend too much time in estimating something, especially because things might change. We do not want to be spending too much time in estimating something that we may do or we may end up not doing at all, right? And hence the Fibonacci series. There's a certain amount of uncertainty already built in to this estimate, and so it gives you a range of estimation rather than a specific number. So we're not crazy about the precision, but we are absolutely happy to go with the range, right? And so this makes estimation much faster as well. So as you may be familiar with the Fibonacci series of the planning poker, what happens is that if we were to estimate a story, then everybody in the team will have poker cards. Poker cards, like I said, will have numbers that represent the Fibonacci series and in that order. So they would have different cards, each of them with denominations of either 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, then 20, 40, 80, or 100. This is called the modified Fibonacci series, by the way, to make it simpler. So those are the different cards that people have. When the team takes up one story at a time, and we will see this in a simulation example shortly, when the team takes up one of these stories, then everybody takes a minute to look at the story. Then they ask the product owner if they have any questions or clarifications that they need. Then on a count of 3, 2, and 1, everybody pulls up their cards and showcases it. They all stand in a circle and they start to show the cards denominations. Now, there could be outliers, like in this example that you see on the screen, Vadim and Anne have a 2 and an 8. So they are extremes, all right? The other 3 and 5 are in between. So in this case, when something has to be estimated and there isn't a consensus, then the outliers have to talk to each other. In this case, Vadim and Anne will try to have a conversation. And Vadim might basically give you, really solid reasons as to why he thinks a certain story is an 8. He might give you, say, 1 or 2 or 3 really, really solid reasons. And Anne, might basically be able to learn or basically be able to appreciate that better, right? So either Anne might come up to a 5 or an 8 altogether, or Vadim might come down after following their conversation. The others can listen in, but they should only chip in when required. The outliers are where you want to basically bring in some more alignment about understanding the requirement, right? So you can do this for the first iteration. You can do, after they have discussed about the definition of done and said that, this story, the login page requires the following: UX to be done, UX design to be done, development tested, unit tested, automation tested, QA tested, what have you. So Vadim might be able to give those clarifications, and then Anne may have missed something, so she will possibly come up. This also bubbles up, and this also corrects the behavioral mistakes which people make when often estimating, which is to say that they just estimate for the part that they think they're responsible for. For example, if we are asking a tester to basically estimate a story, they would only estimate for the testing part of the story rather than the whole definition of done itself. So this is also during your estimation. This is a great exercise for team bonding, and it's a very team building exercise. So there's also a lot of alignment that happens within the team, right? So that's about the planning poker and the Fibonacci series. So like I said, this is a natural pattern that helps choose these numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, etc. and stuff. So the numbers between 1 to say about 80, they're called the definite range. So at least we have a greater sense of visibility and certainty in those. The ones that are 100 and beyond are called the indefinite range. So needless to say, anything beyond a 8 pointer has far lesser certainty than the ones that are smaller than that. So anytime somebody estimates a story which is bigger than an 8, then obviously that needs to be broken down further into multiple user stories so that the team can estimate. It doesn't need a rocket scientist to understand that smaller items can be estimated better than really, really big items, right? So that's where we break it down. Now let's look. So one last technique before we get into the sample exercise. One last technique is that there's something called affinity estimating, right? And what affinity estimating is that when you have a large number of stories that need to be estimated in a really short amount of time, the product owner will then use affinity estimation as a technique to estimate those stories really quickly. Now, how is this done? Right? Now, if you have a linked product backlog, this is how you do it. And this is also called as triangulation by Mycone. So how do we do this? So now here's the thing. Now, first thing that you do is, let's assume that you have about 100 stories on the table. Now, the first thing that you do is you basically have different columns running on a board, and each column represents a size. You say this is small, medium, large, extra large, or you can also have sizes like 0 to 2, 3 to 5, and then 6 to 8, 5 to 8, etc., etc. So you can have those sizes as well, right? Now, by basically creating these columns and having legends for these columns, if the team, all that the team needs to do in the affinity estimation exercise is to start basically picking up each of these stories, assume each story is written on a sticky, and basically paste it in the corresponding column. Now, as a result of this short exercise, the product owner can actually walk away getting a reasonably good idea about how much work is there for for a deliverable or an epic that he has planned to get done through this team. So he can get that idea so that he can then go back to his boss or somebody who's the sponsor who's going to provide funding for all of this work, right? So this is the legends that I spoke about, to say, have different columns, write the size of the column on top of each of them, and then people will start moving stickies to adjust these stickies to the column that they think suits the most, right? Now let's do this really quick. Now here, let me open up a spreadsheet, and I'll show you the concept of how estimations are done. So firstly, what we are assuming here is that we are working on an e-commerce project or an e-commerce release where we would like to have the following 4 features estimated, which is A, user registration, B, search functionality, C, a shopping cart, and D, a payment gateway. So those are the 4 features, and I was before, as I was prepping for the class, I thought this could be a good list for representing a minimal viable feature set. This is now also being called minimal lovable product or minimal, lovable viable product. So they all mean the same. This means, what are the bare minimum set of features that we need to accomplish to be able to go to the market first and start getting ROI, right? A return on investment. So that's what it is. Now, if we identify this, now if we say that each of these is a feature, let's see how we can estimate these. Now, can we estimate user registration directly? The answer is no. Why? Let's see why we can't estimate user registration directly. because user registration has multiple items under it. Now it says it's got a login field, password field, forgot password button or a link. Then there's a submit button. Then there's a social login. Let's say Facebook login. So these are integrated, Facebook integration, or let's say for that matter, LinkedIn integration. And so on and so forth. Now, so there can be any number of stories that go into this. The wisdom lies in trying to identify which ones are the most viable, which ones are the simplest ones right now. In this case, it could be login ID, password, forgot password, and submit button. The Facebook login and the integration login can possibly wait, right? So those are the only ones that we're signing up for. Now, for each of these, let's just see, is the login field, password field, forgot password, and the submit button. Amongst all of these, we need to be able to identify one story which seems like the smallest story in the whole lot, right? Now let's see which one that is. Now, obviously, if I ask you to pick one among these four, it is very likely that you will pick one. So let's see. I see that there's a couple of messages on the chat box. Let's see if there's somebody who's trying to type it in. Guys, do you guys wanna, take a shot and try and, type up which ones you think this might be? Which one out of these could be the smallest story that we could call as a one? Okay. All right. So I am for some reason not able to see the responses. However, it would be, I mean, if we were to take a good guess, it would be the submit button. What is this supposed to do? It's supposed to obviously do a backend, kind of, a little bit of validation, and then basically take you to the landing page, right? Or somebody might argue and say, you know what, the forgot password button, it may be your forgot password could be a smaller one, or just a login field is a smaller one. So one of those. So we can have this conversation. Now let's say that if we, for the sake of doing this, if we say that this is a one pointer, if that's considered as the smallest story, then all our other stories will now be estimated relative to this story, right? If we're calling this a one pointer, then we might call this as a one pointer, or maybe there's a lot of constraints in creating a login field, so maybe this may be a two pointer. Password field, just creating that, this seems simple, maybe same as the size the submit button. Forgot password is a long one. You have to have either one-time passwords or a secret question or something or the other. So forgot password seems to be a little more complex. I would say this is thrice the effort of this one. Now that's how we get this. Now we may want to say, you know what, Facebook login or basically LinkedIn integration is not something that we want to embark on right now, right? And that's totally okay, right? And product owner might say, let's worry about getting the minimal viable feature set done first before we can venture into other things that are slightly fancier, right? Now that said, now we were able to really quick do an estimation of all of these features that we plan to do. Let's count them. Now, let's see, what does that add up to? Now we know for us to be able to work on the user registration, we will need 6 points worth of work to be done. Now you might ask, what are these 6 points? Are these 6 minutes, 6 days, 6 seconds, 6 sprints? What is it? Now that's a very good question. And so for us to get answer to that, this is what we got to do. First thing that we got to do is to figure out which one we called as a reference story. And you do this exercise after we have estimated all the stories as a relative size of the reference story. Now, after that is done, what we do is we just take one of those stories and say, you know what, let's just estimate this one. This one, submit button, is a one pointer. We call this the one pointer. So what does this include? This includes, let's say, creating a UX design for the submit button, then obviously development work, then QA work, then unit testing, then automating the unit test, any documentation, I mean, if you will. Now, let's say that, each of these actually added up to, let's see, this 1 point. Now, the UX design should take you an hour. Development is possibly the only one that's taking you a couple of hours. And let's say the other ones, QA test or unit test, seem to be really small tasks. So I'm going to put one here. Now, as a result, what we're saying is that this 1 pointer is equals to those 7 hours worth of work, which is probably a typical size of a day, a work day, right? 7 hours. Now then we know that if we have to do, then now we know 1 point is about 7 hours, or let's say 1 day, 1 work day. Now, if we were to do 6 points worth of work, then we need 6 days of duration. Now the reason I basically walked you through all of this is to help you understand that sizing will help you determine the duration, and which is obviously an expectation that once we tell somebody how much it takes for us to accomplish something, the very successive question that we have to be prepared to answer is that how long will this take? And that's where the transition from the size to the duration happened here, right? So which is 6 points to 6 days. That's what most executives want. Now let's get back to this, to the slides, right? Now there's a couple of problems, and I would like you to take a minute or so in trying to solve these. This may be a good way to practice and try to understand how estimations are done in Agile projects. Now let's look at this one first. Right? What is this trying to say? It says a project has 100 story points remaining. The team has a velocity of 10 story points. The team has successfully completed 4 iterations of 2 weeks each. Find the duration of the project. Right? I'll give you guys a minute, and I think estimation, obviously, because there's science and numbers involved, it may be best for you to give this a shot, and that's how your learning will be guaranteed. So please go ahead and take a minute to give me what you think could be the right answer. Okay, I'm waiting. We have 5. We are at 3:39. Let's get the right answer by 3:40. Okay. So for some reason, I can obviously not see your responses. However, I know that some of you may be enthusiastically trying to type up your answers. Now let's see. Okay. All right. So the right answer here is, I can give you choices to pick from: 10 sprints, 15 sprints, 6 sprints, or 20 sprints, right? Now, and there could be another one which is 14 sprints. And the right answer is 14 sprints. And the question is why? It is because, firstly, the project has about 100 points remaining, which means that there's obviously some work that's already done. The team has a velocity of 10 points, and they have already completed 4 iterations of 2 weeks each, right? What does that mean? That because they have a velocity of 10 and they've finished 4 iterations, they've already done they've already done about 8 weeks worth of work already, right? So 4 iterations into 2 weeks, which is 8 weeks, or let's just say 4 iterations are done. Because there's 100 story points remaining and 10 is the velocity, you divide 100 by 10, then you get 10 more sprints to go, right? So 4 plus 10 makes 14 sprints or 28 weeks, depending on what the answer choices are. That is the duration of this project, right? Now that's, I think that was a starter. So if I'll go ahead, have you guys focus on another such problem, and this is also something that I'm sure you'll find interesting. So let's go over this really quick and see, what you think the answer to this is. I'll read out the question for you, then I'll give you guys a minute or two to basically, think over and answer this. With this says there are 60 members working in a team with a billable rate of $50 an hour, and one Scrum Master who's billed at $60 an hour, right? As per the estimation, the project will need 10 iterations to complete with 2 weeks, which is, 10 iterations is about, each iteration is about 2 weeks, is what he's saying. What will be the cost of the project, right? So go ahead, put your, put your pens and papers or spreadsheets to work and tell me what you think the answer to this one should be, right? So the reason I had these problems up here is because these are typically things that agile project managers, scrum masters will need to think through, and go back to their sponsors with advice or funding request for. So these are typical real life questions. All right, take a couple of minutes. Please answer this. Hello. Okay, so I don't know, it looks like there was an audio lost. So let me really quick go over these problems with you again. I'm sure we finished the first one, and on the second one, the question was there are 60 members working in the team at the billable hours. We were trying to compute the cost of the team per sprint, right? In doing so, what we did is that we would take, the $50 an hour per team member, multiply that by 60 members, right? And then that would be for an hour. Then we multiply that by 8 hours to get the cost for the day, and then multiply that by 10 to get the cost for the sprint. And if there are 10 sprints, then we do that for the entire 10 days, or the 10 days or 10 sprints. Similar is the case with the Scrum Master as well, right? Now, again, just to re-emphasize, I know because we lost audio, just to re-emphasize, these are typical day-to-day scenarios that Scrum Masters and Agile project managers have to deal with on an ongoing basis, and hence these problems were included in here, right? Now, this is, needless to say, one of the other tools that we could use to track project progress and really transparency about the progress being made is release burn-down charts, which try to showcase how many points worth of work has been accomplished against a time scale in the sprint, right? Now, whether this is a very, very simple yet very, very powerful tool that's used to showcase progress realized on a release slash project. That's something that I would encourage you to do if you haven't already been doing that. So that's one part about release burn down charts and the beauty of it. Now, just to give you a quick recap, that brings us to the end of the slideshow, but just to give you a quick recap, what we went over today was relative sizing, story points, planning poker, and affinity estimation. Relative sizing, we use this example to do relative sizing of stories or work. If we use these examples, we can, of course, we can extrapolate or use the same examples, or basically extend the same kind of analogy between this and stories that we do in software development, right? Factors, we went over the different factors. One of the key ingredients that go into determining the size of the story is the definition of done. And the team needs to have an agreement on the definition of done before they can start estimating any story on the project or release. The other factors we spoke about, when we have no idea what needs to be done, we might basically get an expert. When we have some idea, then we can compare one user story with the others. And if this is too big to be estimated, then we disaggregate those estimates, right? Now, that's something that we went over. We also went over the fact that Fibonacci series is used for estimating stories. The reason why Fibonacci series is used, as you can see, is there's a certain amount of uncertainty already built in, and using planning poker gamifies the whole experience. And I saw one of the questions that came up in the chat box were saying, if we are using Fibonacci series, how does a half appear in there, right? So I think although a half is put in the planning poker card sets, it is, I mean, somebody's trying to say that it's not a zero, but it won't take us half a day either. So it's somewhere in between, right? So that's what you want to do. It's completely left to the team. Sometimes teams say, you know what, there are two of these items that we can do in a single day, in which case they just say we started to call them half and half, and they just get done in a single day if one day is equals to 1 point. So that's basically how this comes up. Originally, though, they started with a one with the pure Fibonacci series. They did not have a half, but then eventually, some teams started to say that, you know what, we are forcing, and our team members are saying that because the minimum is a 1-pointer, I can only do one thing in a day. So then, hence, the half pointer was introduced later in the game to say, if there's multiple things that you can do in a single day, if one day is a one point in for that team, then you might as well use half a point. Okay, we don't break it down further though. So good question, right? Now we went over that. We went over affinity estimation, where we said, how can we kind of categorize the various number of stories, maybe hundreds of stories, and really quickly get a rough estimation on those stories. We used affinity estimation. We went over that. Schedule and budget, we went over the 2 problems. We also went over the other Excel spreadsheet exercise, where we tried to see how we can break down into stories, estimate stories using definition of done, and then use the sizing to arrive at the duration as well, right, for completing a feature or multiple stories in a feature. Right. So the moral or the key takeaway that I want you to take away from this is to understand and basically internalize the fact that if we follow story, if we understand story estimations in Agile, and B, follow the best practices that we spoke about in doing story estimations, the teams will be happy to estimate and will be happy to sign up for work. It's not somebody else doing the commitments on the team's behalf for the work to be done. Now, by doing so, if the team is estimating and is committing to the work, then it's very, very likely that it will be very close to accuracy, and it's very, very likely that nobody will have to work overtime for that matter. Right? So, and that said, this is not a silver bullet. It does not mean that we will never work overtime, but at least this will reduce the chances of that, because this is the team, having their own motivation. Given that the team has tried to break this down and give the estimates, chances of accuracy are much, much higher than somebody else, like a project manager conventionally giving the estimates, in which case the team will possibly have to crib, work weekends, late nights to accomplish work that they never signed up for or they don't believe in the estimates of. Okay, so that said, I'd like to open it up for any questions that any of you may have, and and after that I think we can wrap up after that, but happy to take any questions that you guys may have. Yeah, I was able to see the questions that you typed in about Fibonacci series earlier, so you can type it the same way and I'll be able to see them. I see another question that came in from somebody that said, while doing relative estimation, shall tester efforts will get calculated? Yes, it's a very good question somebody asked, and I'll repeat that. It says, when we are doing relative estimation, should we factor in estimates for the tester? And like I mentioned earlier, when we are estimating a story, we estimate for the whole definition of done, a checklist, not just for either testing or for development alone, right? Everybody has to estimate for satisfying the definition of done. What is the estimate for, UX design, development, QA, if there's documentation that needs to be done, automation that needs to be done as well, right? It's a good question there. Okay. All right, so there's the other question that came up is saying, estimating functional and non-functional requirements, are they different? I think the answer is yes and no. Of course, functional requirements need to be estimated. I mean, you can break down functional requirements into features, further down into stories, etc., and then the team can estimate those. When you're trying to estimate non-functional requirements, this could be any of those. For instance, performance requirement, it could be a securability requirement, it could be an integratability requirement. So for any of those, you should still be able to break it down into logical portions of work that can then be estimated using the Fibonacci series. So it is best for us to keep them separate as separate work items, and then break it down to to a certain level of granularity so that the team finds it easy to estimate them. So of course the method or the technique that is used to estimate them will still remain the same using planning poker. But are they estimated separately? The answer is yes. Okay. All right. So let's move on to the next question. Shall we put story points for spikes? Very good question again, somebody has asked. The answer is yes. The way you go about basically spikes is that at the beginning of a sprint, if you identify that in a certain area, you're not sure about how to go about estimating a specific item or a specific story or a feature, then you can ask the product owner and say, dear product owner, for instance, if this is about a payment gateway integration that we need to do, right? I'm a small portal that sells, let's say, children's clothes online, right? And I've never done payment gateway integration. Now, rather than trying to go down the path of estimating all of your effort in payment gateway integration, which will all be wrong because I've never got experience, what I might say is that, you know what, I will do a spike story, which is a proof of concept story. Give me a day, and this is or a 1 point worth of freedom. I will do a proof of concept, and I will get back to you at the end of the first day. Typically, for a proof of concept or a spike, you give them 1 point. At the end of 1 point, which mostly is 1 day, in this case, let's just say if it's 1 day, at the end of that 1 point, in the next stand-up meeting, the developer has to come back with either a proof of concept that yeah, I sent a ping request to this external database and we are able to get ping request back, so the proof of concept works, so we can estimate the remaining payment gateway story. So he will either say, a, my proof of concept worked and here's how it works, or he might come back and say, hey, you know what, I will need another 2 spikes to be able to come up with a conclusive proof of concept. And in that case, a product owner might give him 2 more spikes or 2 more points to go back and do his research and come back with. But needless to say, whether it is spikes, functional, non-functional stories, everything needs to be sized. The typical and the default size for a spike story is a 1 point. You can take multiple such spikes. Okay? Hopefully that answers your question. All right. So Kamalesh says estimates in the Excel are ideal days or something else. So like I said, these estimates that we did, firstly, we started with relative estimations. We identified the smallest item, then we did a relative estimation. Then what we did is we basically took the reference story, which was your reference story. So every time you have to do a estimation of any story, it is in relative size of this one. So it's just twice of this, etc. Now after that, we basically broke down that one reference story to identify what does a 1 point. We call that a 1 point. What does a 1 point equate to? Then we figured out that 1 point equates to 7 hours here, right? So that estimate that you saw on the spreadsheet was in story points. All right. How do you link story points with days? So and that's a question that Kshitij asked. So this is exactly how you link story points with days, Kshitij. And this is obviously one of those really regular questions that come up in the workshops when I do estimation. And hence I've taken this example to showcase that you identify a reference story. which is the smallest story in the backlog. Then you estimate all other stories relative to that story. And after you're done, you take the reference story, break it down by your definition of done, and then you will get the number of hours, which is nothing but the sum of all the items that you need to do to satisfy the definition of done. And hence you will know we had called this story submit button as a one pointer. Now one pointer now we know is 7 hours, or approximately 1 day. So that's how you approximate one productive day to a point. Okay. All right. Can we add a buffer story and estimate it based on the distractions in the last sprint? I would shy away from doing that, because this becomes buffer stories will then very soon become the miscellaneous stories. Now, once the team gets to know that there is a buffer, guess what happens? They will always think that there's this cushion at the end of the release, in which they can go ahead and finish their work. So they will always basically fall back on this option. So we should shy away from having any miscellaneous bucket or buffer stories for that matter. All right, so let's see what the next question is. How to estimate the total number of iterations? Please let me know, Lakshmana. Okay, so very good question, Lakshmana. And we did one such problem. Maybe there was an audio issue at that stage. But as you can see here, here's where we said, if you can see, the first story or the first problem was trying to basically capture how we can estimate the total number of iterations, duration of the project. It says, firstly, you will compute the story points, just like we did in the spreadsheet, right? And then we'll have to figure out how much more work needs to be done. And then we will know the duration of the project. So estimate all of the story points, then based on how much you can do in a specific sprint, you will be able to divide the total size of the backlog by the velocity. In this case, this was a 10, whatever, 100 by 10, which is another 10 sprints remaining. So that's how you get the overall size. And of course, if you want that in iterations, then you get this 14 iterations. And if you want that in weeks, then you multiply that by the number of weeks that make up per iteration. Okay, so good question there as well. Very interesting. And I'm glad that these questions are coming in. This gives me an opportunity to answer, and everybody else learns from your questions. So that's fantastic. Okay. Will there be any continuation to this on this topic that Sudhir is asking this question? So Sudhir, so firstly, I'm going to assume that you found this session very valuable, and that's a compliment. So thank you for that. And that's possibly why you're asking for a continuation of this specific seminar. So we haven't planned one, but if there are multiple individuals amongst you who would like to see a continuation or an extension of the Agile estimations, please send a note to Satyavrat or Ajiveta Consulting. Just do a reply all, and just do a reply to the invite that you got, and we will try and set something up depending on the amount of interest that there is. Okay, but good question, and I'm very glad that you asked this. It just tells us how much interest there is as well. All right. Okay. All right. So we are almost 8 minutes over, so I apologize, but I think this was helpful to spend some time on Q&A here. Satya, do you see any other questions coming in, or are we done with all the questions, and are we ready to wrap this up? Okay. All right. So it looks like we are done with all of the questions. That's fantastic. So So everybody who's joined us, I know there's 21 of you who've joined us on this, who are active right now on this, webinar. So firstly, I really thank you for taking the time in learning, because I think, constantly upgrading our skills is what's going to make us relevant and is going to keep us in this job, and is going to make us a valuable resource. So thank you for making the choice to take the time and investing in learning. So this is fantastic. I enjoyed speaking to you today in the Agile Estimation webinar, and hopefully our paths will cross, and hopefully we will get to speak to each other or interact with each other in another webinar as well, or in another training course. So thank you. Good luck for whatever it is that you plan to do with your life and career, and hopefully we'll speak again. Bye now.